All right, man. Well, look, thanks for coming on for a discussion with me tonight. I'm looking forward to this.
Same thing. It's my pleasure. Thanks
S-
for inviting me.
So I think that probably the best place to start is maybe you could just explain a little bit about your background or what you're doing with Verify, because I think a lot of people probably aren't too familiar with what's going on in the Canadian Bitcoin scene, and maybe even less so with the work you're doing. So why don't you just kind of intro all of that, and then we'll get started.
Sure, certainly. I've been in Bitcoin for a couple of years. First, it was a personal interest. Then it basically became that and my full time job. I started out of university. I have a background in computer science. I started messing with Bitcoin mining uh, before before I was in what I'm doing now, and mining in our Quebec situation had difficulties related to Hydro-Quebec, the only electricity provider. So that didn't turn out so well. So, but quickly we realized something that was missing on the market, which were services for companies and investors to better understand Bitcoin, to better use Bitcoin. So that's what we're doing now. Our main service right now, it's helping investors and organizations help create secure environments for their bitcoins. So creating multi-signature wallets, running nodes, privacy setups, even providing liquidity. So it's really the whole onboarding process of an investor or an organization into Bitcoin, but with a focus on security.
Right. And so the company is called Verify. Is that it? Just Verify, right?
Yeah, it's just verify.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so you guys are basically a consultancy, is that right? So it would
Exactly. Yes.
people like private individuals or organizations that want to learn about Bitcoin, understand what's going on, engage in it somehow, either personally or organizationally, they consult with you guys and you give them best practices and educate them and tell them everything they need to know to do Bitcoin properly. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we did a couple research mandates where folks wanted to either research particular aspect of Bitcoin, either for investment purposes or for business opportunity purposes. We've also done some seminars, and we also host a regular Bitcoin meetup in Montreal to educate folks as well. But our main, what people have mostly approached us for, it's everything related to security of the Bitcoins. And also when it comes to developing applications on top of Bitcoin or businesses, the focus is always how can I create a system that doesn't lose my Bitcoin, doesn't expose my security. So that's really been what we've been focused on, but we're certainly always open to research and education mandates.
Right. And how much, you know, obviously Bitcoin is still kind of new. For people like us, we feel like it's been around for a while, but for most people, they're just starting to hear about it and just starting to want to understand it better. What's in terms of demand for like a consultancy service like that? What's been your guys' experience thus far? Like, is there robust demand, or do you have to kind of pitch it aggressively to people? What's that been like?
To be honest, it's kind of in between both. So we don't go after new investors, mostly because we think big. If you're not gonna get Bitcoin pitched to you, you're gonna kind of you're gonna get it once you get it, right? So
Right, right.
we don't try to really convince people of Bitcoin. We just talk to people at the meetups online, and then we develop trust, and then a relationship comes up naturally, and then business comes up. But that's really the challenge: is how can I tell a Bitcoiner, hey, you want to use Bitcoin because it's trustless, but then if you want me to help you, you kind of have to trust me, right? Because there's privacy implications, things that you will talk to me about. So that's the biggest challenge that we're facing, and that's why we think consultancy for high net worth individuals will exist, for organizations will exist, but most Bitcoin investors will want to pursue simple plug and play solutions, which they don't have to talk anyone to. They just order a product and they can have their privacy at their discretion.
Right. So should I interpret that as you saying the consulting services you guys provide is for higher net worth individuals that are looking for a more kind of concierge, hand holding sort of service around their involvement in Bitcoin.
Yes, exactly. Well, that wasn't the purpose initially, but that's kind of the turn it got in. I honestly believe that this is a recurring market. High net worth individuals are not going to get in this business all by themselves and risk making unsecured transactions and losing money, right? Either they're going to go with trusted solutions, but a lot of them are looking for the censorship resistance and store of value aspects of holding their own keys. So those people need our help the most.
Right. And so how do you guys, acting in that capacity, how do you guys get over or get around the trust issue? You know, like when people work with you, and if they're high net worth individuals, obviously there's probably a decent amount of money on the line. What is kind of the way you bridge that gap, or overcome that hurdle in terms of privacy?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's all the legal aspect. So we make sure to be to we propose to the clients that we can sign anything that says in a case of disclosure, they can basically go after us, some things like that. But that's the basic stuff. But when it comes to really trust, which I think is the important part, well, for us is showing our faces regularly at the Bitcoin meetups, being very open about who we are, and very open to questions, and really sharing our knowledge in the most possible way before embarking on a deal with a client is what we really try to push for. Uh, and that's why I talk to people all the time. I don't and we say it on our website. If somebody just wants to talk for half an hour, there's no charge involved. We can talk and we can develop a relationship. And once they're ready to share their secrets, if they're ever ready, right? Because we can also do it in a way that they don't have to share anything. We've done it with a few clients. They don't want to share everything. They just want us to teach them how to use the tools. So we make a workshop. We show them how to use Electrum, how to use a cold card, how to run a node, and then they can reproduce it by themselves when they're isolated in an environment. So
Right.
there's that approach as well.
I would almost think, and I don't have any experience in this, obviously, but just from my mind, I would almost think that that would be, a very in-demand service, because, people will come to Bitcoin and they'll think, yeah, I want to be involved in this, but I don't know how to run a node, store my Bitcoin securely, all that kind of stuff. And I would think that they would want someone to educate them on that. But is that the most common use of your services, or is it a relatively uncommon?
No, it's pretty common for us to teach people. I'd say it's less than people just wanting us to make their setups for themselves, because at the end of the day, it can get pretty technical and complicated, and not everybody is able to learn quickly from that, right? So, but there's still many who are on the edge of they're technical enough, but they just don't want to mess it up. So that's when they come for a workshop, and we show them the ropes.
Right. And when you say like do somebody's setup, you guys don't like do custody or anything like that, right? You, if anything, use some third party like service providers, but mainly you just help people get the structure in place. I'm assuming you don't have access to any of their like confidential information or that kind of stuff.
No, we never have access to anyone's keys, but we will assist during the setups and the creation of wallets. Let's say I'll be in a separate room. I'll send the client to the other room. He can note his words. He can set up his call card, and then I can show him how to take the XPubs, put them in Electrum, create a wallet file, run an Electrum server. Nothing about sharing of keys at all, just showing them how to create the setup that they're going to use uh, eventually.
Right. And for most of these people, are they like setting this up to just like hodl long term, or do they actually want to, use Bitcoin on a daily, weekly, monthly, transactional basis?
Everybody wants, in my opinion, most of my clients want to just hodl Bitcoin.
Right.
I still think some keep like some mini checking accounts. Some like to play with Lightning, but 95% of the use cases is, or even more, is certainly for hodling coins.
Right. Now tell me this. So let's say it's a high net worth client, right? And they've engaged your services, and You're like, cool, all right, and they tell you what they're looking to do, and you help them set it up. What's the reaction like once everything is set up and you're like, okay, here's your node, here's your hardware, here's how you do a transaction, all that kind of stuff. What's the reaction to all that when it's done?
So it's at certain moments, there's an overwhelming of overwhelm, because it's a very complex setup in the way we make it. We always propose a different hardware wallets, multi-sig, with Electrum. So at first, getting them used to the setup, it's kind of a jump from what they used before. Most people use a simple ledger, or they have a mobile app. So it's definitely a big jump to go from an easy solution, very simple, to a multi-sig ultra secure solution. But it's very evident to them that the multi-sig setup with different hardware wallets with passphrases, most of the time, it's blatantly and obviously the most secure way to go, and it lets them sleep at night, and that's really the most important part. A lot of people have a lot of investment in Bitcoin, but they're stressed about the consequences. They're constantly thinking about it. So people really tell us, okay, this is overwhelming a little bit and it's kind of complicated, but I definitely feel safer now.
Right. Because I would think, at least for some of them, they'd get all this set up and then they'd just be like, holy shit, this is awesome. Like now I'm completely sovereign, and just experiencing that for the first time, like it was for all of us, is usually a pretty exciting moment. So I was just trying to get some insight into what kind of reactions you had seen over the course of the work.
No, it's definitely an exciting moment, but a lot of people don't exactly understand the implications.
Right.
They understand the security you get from a multi-sig and from hardware wallets, but running a node is kind of the hardest uh, understandable action that folks have to do. Even myself at the beginning, I was like, okay, but my coins won't get stolen if I use someone else's node. So why do it, right? So there's always those extra steps to take. Uh, for sovereignty particularly, and then I'd say privacy is also very easy. It's easier to grasp as well, because people understand how blockchain transactions are are easy to analyze and track, right? So let's say when I talk about a coin join, that's easier for them to understand than verifying your own transactions with your own node. But once they make that aha moment that we've all been through, it's definitely very exciting to see that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And so, as far as a business model for you guys, like, do you have flat fees for what you charge, or percentage of holdings that you secure, or how do you guys make money? What's that structure like?
Sure. So our business model is mostly an hourly rate for consultancy, but we have different packages for different type of investors. Some are very simple packages. We have 1 hour on the phone with you, and we ship you or show you how to use run a node. We advise you on which tools to buy, to do a setup, send some documentation. Those setups start at a couple $100 Canadian dollars. Then we have the most advanced package we have that's very popular. It's around 2,000 Canadian dollars, and it's a whole setup of hardware wallets, of block plates, metal plates for writing the keys, a 3 hour workshop, advice on the inheritance plan, which is something we do as well, and a few extra components.
Yeah. Can you tell me about what you guys do for inheritance planning? I'm always interested to know what different people do for that.
Sure. So that was an interesting part of our services, and to be honest, it's kind of flexible depending on what the client already has. So a lot of people already have setups for the rest of their assets when it comes to inheritance planning. So we try to be flexible in that to get the client the solution that's closest to what he already has. So we always advise a use of a notary as a third party, not for holding keys, but maybe for holding a part of the setup, just a part of the instructions. So a usual setup that we can make is, okay, you have a two of three, and probably not everybody has three locations for different keys. So maybe let's say one client would give one key to his mother, or leave it at his mother's house, and then we can say, but without exactly telling her, hey, this is the pin, this is, just leaving it there. And then on the instructions, it would say, hey, here's how to find one key, and the other key, well, it's already at your place. Uh, this is how to use it, right? In a way that even if the notary was had bad intentions, or he had someone came to get hold of this, even then they wouldn't be able to recover, to get the funds without having to, let's say, trespass in someone else's house. So we definitely divide the control, but there's always this challenge when it comes to inheritance, that you will always, in my opinion, there cannot be a perfect solution. You will always have to trust a certain party, unless you're taking everything to the grave.
Right. Um, so you said you guys don't do too much like formal pitching to, I don't know, family offices or investor groups and stuff like that. It's mostly you guys put yourself out there, you write blogs, you host meetups and stuff like that, and you kind of, clients come to you, right? Because as you become more known. But I'm sure you've done it at least a couple times before. But when you're pitching or discussing Bitcoin to someone who's not very familiar, right? So maybe not the people that are at the meetup, but like, you know, a high net worth individual who's really just heard about it, wants to get some exposure, but has no idea what it's about. How do you like describe, pitch, characterize Bitcoin to such people?
Sure. So I always make the comparison between Bitcoin and gold. Always classify Bitcoin as a digital gold and as a censorship resistant money, right? So I think the main value proposition of Bitcoin is the fact that you can make censorship resistant payments from one side of the planet to the other, while keeping a good level of privacy, particularly if you know what you're doing. And then the scarcity comes later. Since there's demand for this censorship resistant money, and on top of that, we have a digital gold that has a predictable supply. That's and this is all backed by a distributed network of miners, which invest billions of dollars into looking up for these new bitcoins and looking up for these fees that are coming out of the network. So there's all this whole set of incentives. So then we create these units, and this ensemble of units, 21 million bitcoins, which everybody wants to get to get access to either the digital gold or to make censorship resistant payments. And that's how I explain Bitcoin pretty much.
Right. And what kind of pushback do you get? Like, do you get people coming back like claiming nonsense, or what kind of the critiques do you get?
Well, there's always the usuals, right? Like there's always the it's volatile, right? There's always the it's right, but nobody uses it for payments, right? So there's always these two, and you know, we've all heard them before. And what I usually say about this is, in my opinion, Bitcoin's not really ready for payments right now, and it's fine, because that's not what the market wants. The market wants to hodl it mostly, right? There's definitely a lot of people who use it for payments, and their use case works. But let's say in most of Western cities, most people use it as a store of value. So that's what I tell them. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 15 years, when the price will stabilize. And it's also the same argument for volatility. It's the purpose of Bitcoin is to be volatile. The purpose of Bitcoin is to increase in price. Else, it's not proving its digital gold use case, right? So also the same thing. I say eventually, I believe Bitcoin will be less volatile, and when that happens, it will be used for payments more.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that that's like such a common critique of Bitcoin, like can't use it to buy coffee and whatever. And even though obviously Lightning is really changing the narrative on that now, but even so, like it really shows, it really reveals what so many people think money is. You know, like so many people, especially in Western developed countries, have kind of Like for them, money is just a medium of exchange. It's how I buy things. And if I can't do that with my money, then it's not money. And, and it makes no wonder that we're in the situation we're in with fiat money and the way things have gone, with people being so like ignorant to the other function of money, which is, well, and I know there's some dispute over this, in my opinion, store of value, right? You want your money to be able to maintain purchasing power. And that's just not, like, people have just accepted that that's no longer a function of their money. So the only thing they default to is, can I buy something with it? And I totally agree with you. We're not in that, the market is saying we're not in that stage yet. It's being built and stuff like that. But why would you spend the money when you're in the early stages of monetization?
Exactly. That's exactly my take on it as well. Why would you spend the bitcoins if you think they're going to be worth tomorrow? And everybody's telling themselves that on the market. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we have in the relative recent years we have very stable currencies in the Western world. Sure, they've lost 99% of their value over 100 years, but still, in the last 20, 30 years, it's not nothing comparable to countries who have lived through hyperinflation, where the people haven't lived through hyperinflation like my parents did in Peru. They realize the value of of having a money that keeps its value day and day, and not only for purchasing power, but not only being able to purchase things, but also to store value.
Yeah. And I wonder at this stage in Bitcoin, the flip side of that is, and I agree, people in developing countries, the use case, or the value prop is obviously different than people in Western countries. But I wonder how much now, to the extent that people are actually aware of Bitcoin, and obviously most people in developing countries are not aware of Bitcoin, but to what degree, when they become aware, will the price bias, the fact that one Bitcoin is $10,000, will kind of stop them in their tracks, or make them think that it's not something that they can use to solve the problem of hyperinflation, debasing currencies, government mismanagement, that kind of stuff.
Honestly, it's funny these kind of questions because I always have a changing perspective on these questions. So lately, what I've been telling myself is not every if we think everyone, particularly in developing countries, will be able to understand all these technicalities and complex aspects of Bitcoin, I think we're wrong. I think most people won't understand every single technical aspect of it, and will focus on the value proposition. And the value proposition has to be transmitted in a way that's simple enough, such as it could be an application, it could be a service, but it certainly has to be transmitted by entrepreneurs that make it easier for the end user to use it for every day, or for different reasons, right? So I think abstracting or simplifying the fact that one Bitcoin maybe will be worth more in the future, but right now it's still worth a lot. Maybe abstracting that it's not like a stock. You can buy a portion. You can even subdivide it. We can use another term of unit. I think those things would help.
You said you used the example of your mother. Is she a Bitcoiner?
Well, my parents definitely understand the value prop of Bitcoin. I don't think they're not much invested in Bitcoin because I'm invested in Bitcoin, so they definitely think that. Well, I tell them that if things go well for me, things are gonna go well for them as well. So,
Right.
but they definitely understand the value prop of Bitcoin since they lived through hyperinflation before.
So in saying that, do you just mean, like, are they just relying on you, or are they somewhat apprehensive because they still don't really like know what it's all about?
Well, to be honest, they don't. They don't have the as much money to invest in something like this.
Hmm.
Obviously I've given them some bitcoins over the years, but they're not very technical either. So
Right.
it's still scaring them away, those little parts. But they understand the store value prop, which I think it's the most essential part to understand for some people. It, it's a solution for hyperinflationary currencies.
Right. I only dig down and ask further about that because my own dad, for the last several years, I've always been talking about Bitcoin. My mom is just like, doesn't want to hear it, thinks it's, risky, doesn't understand it, everything. But my dad, he's been pretty receptive to the conversation over the years, and like every year I can see him be more curious. And now, he just finished Safe's book, The Bitcoin Standard. He read The Internet of Money. So I'm actually going to have him on the podcast soon, just to like, talk to him and see what he thinks about everything now. But I'm just intrigued because obviously a lot of this is a generational thing. Obviously some people in the older generations get it, particularly people that are in the investment world. But like the internet, like everything, technology skews toward the younger generations, and that's a at least right now a big hurdle to the older generations being able to feel comfortable enough with it to to buy into it.
Totally. I think it's also the technology that's the barrier in this question. I think it's very cool that you have your dad on the podcast and that you have him reading such great books. I wish my parents would, but I think they don't exactly share the interests that I have, and I think that's something that will bring you to Bitcoin in a way. A lot of people come from the investment world, or even as a political tool, or really on the privacy aspect. And let's to be honest, lots of folks don't share those interests. So they're very open to talk about it, but not so much as to read a book on it.
For sure. This is what we addressed a little bit earlier, but just about, the money as only a medium of exchange. The fact is that most people, unless necessity forces them to care about something, they just don't. And as you said, in the developed world, most people don't think there's anything wrong with the money. And as a result, they're not, their minds, their curiosity isn't kind of like tuned to be aware of things that address that problem, because to them it's not a problem. And that's obviously the majority of cases. I don't know what your social life is like, but and people are starting to come around a bit now, just because I'm such a, like, any opportunity I get, I want to talk about Bitcoin in a social environment. But most people, if you start talking about like the Canadian dollar and Canada's central bank policy and the inflation rate and they sold their gold and all this kind of stuff, people's eyes just gloss over. They just, it's not important to them. There's other things that are more important. And until like in places where it's become a necessity to be aware of these things and manage them properly, then, the apathy just takes over for most people.
Totally, totally. I totally agree with that. I talk about it. I used to talk about it more, to be honest, because I totally got that reaction as well. And sometimes people even think you're telling conspiracy theories.
I know, I
Talking
know.
about like basic central bank stuff. Well, the system's really made it in that purpose, right? It's made for those facts to be hidden, for people not to have any interest on them, because else, if everybody understood, the change of the market would have already happened. But yes, I think it will come out of necessity, and a lot of Bitcoiners I've talked to share this thought as well, because at the end of the day, like, we think it's cool, but Bitcoin's not really cool. Like, it's a very good tool. It's very useful, and that's why I think it will come out of necessity as well.
How dare you, Gustavo? Bitcoin is cool as fuck.
I think so too, but many of my friends don't.
Yeah, well, maybe we need to make it cooler. Maybe that's on us to, to sex it up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think that's definitely something that we have to.
I think you just muted your mic.
Okay,
Yeah, you're good. You're
sorry.
good. Yeah, it's funny. Just the last point on, or last comment on this point, but in many social settings today, you'll hear like vigorous conversations about climate change and equality and like all this kind of stuff. And nobody brings up what I think is the primary source of most of those things, which is, obviously monetary policy, the money, central banking, what we've been discussing. And when you bring it up, like people just don't have a framework to contextualize it. And so it like just lands on deaf ears a lot.
Totally. It's the hidden back end that nobody's aware of, but everybody's literally talking about consequences of it all the time.
Right. Exactly.
And I just think it's easier to ignore it for a lot of people, and even a lot of people who are aware of it choose to ignore it, just for the fact that they think this can't ever change. There's no alternatives, uh, and I think that's kind of sad because we're always giving ourselves this limit that we're limited by the fiat money system that we have, and I believe as long as we don't change that framework, nothing else that gets built on top can really change that much, right? I always say that the monetary system is the base layer of everything. Then the economic system comes on top, businesses come on top, the government comes on top of the monetary base system as well. So if we don't change that, if we don't address the base layer, how can we make relevant changes to the higher layers?
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And what you encounter so often is, people saying things like, things in developed countries, things look pretty okay. Things are all right. Like I'm happy. I have opportunity and that kind of stuff. And I agree. We should be grateful for where things are at. And, we're not locked up in cages and we freely move and we have opportunity. But once you start to understand, how monetary manipulation affects economics and behavior and all that kind of stuff, then you start to realize, at least it's my opinion, that there's been such a suppressive effect of this, monetary mismanagement. It makes me think and yearn and hope and dream and aspire to what could actually be if we were on a different system and a different standard. And that's what gets me jazzed up about Bitcoin all the time. I mean, there's a million things, but like that's one of them. It's just like, fuck, what kind of an amazing future could we have if this was the money that, people of the world used? And I think the answer is like inconceivable, really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think this internet era will change that, and that's something that I'm really consistent on. I think internet Bitcoin will be the money of the internet. I'm still not 100%. I still couldn't affirm with 100% certainty that it will be the money of the streets, let's say. But definitely on the internet, as we're gonna see more economy moving towards the internet. Well, a lot of it is already. Then definitely Bitcoin will play a higher role, and people will understand it more. And I think, like you said before, it's a generation gap, right? A lot of the new generations are gonna be using payments much more on the internet, and that's how we're going to see awareness increase as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've probably said this too much on the podcast, but just imagine, like when I finished college, it was 2009, right? And like, I looked out on the world, and much as I tried to be positive about things, and to a great extent, I was, but I saw some pretty dark forces, and like I couldn't see how they could be unwound. And then when Bitcoin came on the scene, after my first couple blushes, I started to see how this could be a tool to overturn a lot of that stuff. And but just imagine if you're, a 10-year-old today. I mean, Bitcoin's always been around. So when you like have that, whether it's at 10, 12, 14, 16, when you kind of like become aware of the world and start asking all these questions, like you're not going to go down that, like, or there's less likelihood you're going to go down that like hopeless, everything is fucked sort of road, because the Bitcoin road is right there being like, yo, come down here. I'll like, we can do something with this. We can do something. And like, I'm jealous of kids growing up today that like right from the get, they have that. So of course, like you said, they're going to just go right into that. It's not going to be a hurdle to overcome. They're digitally native. It's always been around, and they're just going to dive in, learn about it, and start using it.
I hadn't ever seen it from that point. That when you're a kid and you start asking your questions and trying to find answers, right? Bitcoin's gonna be there for you, and I think that changes things.
Totally.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. You're in Montreal, right?
Yes.
What's the Bitcoin scene like in, because I don't speak to too many Canadian Bitcoiners. And, for most of my adult life, I haven't lived in Canada, even though I'm from Canada originally. But I get the sense that there's still a lot of like blockchain, not Bitcoin stuff going on in Canada. Perhaps not Montreal. I hear Montreal's a pretty good like Bitcoin stronghold, but like, Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, I hear there's still lots of blockchain
Yeah,
stuff.
I'd say it's mostly Toronto,
Right.
since Ethereum comes from there, and many others come from there as well. Uh, uh, Montreal is definitely a big Bitcoin maximalist stronghold,
Nice.
and I think that is due to Francis Pouliot, CEO of Bull Bitcoin. He really took the community to another level with the meetups that he started many years ago, and creating an environment for entrepreneurs to collaborate and really have a common vision of Bitcoin maximalism. And he's a very one of the people that I trust most, and we're very close with. So we got all these companies in Montreal, Verify. There's Bull Bitcoin. There's Knox. There's ShakePay. So there's many different companies that and all have. I'd say some are have we have definitely everybody has different views on some things, but a more common vision than let's say in other cities where they're fighting one altcoin versus the other. Here it's mostly Bitcoin, I'd say. For some like myself, I'm clearly a Bitcoin maximalist. Vancouver, I think I don't know if there's much of a community in Vancouver of either. To be honest, Calgary, I know there's a lot of Bitcoin maximalists in Calgary. I think there was a lot of blockchain, but I think it's reversing now.
How many people show up to the meetups and stuff in Montreal?
A lot. So
Really?
it's at least 40 people, but we've had meetups with 100, 120 people,
That
uh,
that's
many times.
that's awesome, but still when I think of those numbers, I'm like, it's not like for a city like Montreal, for 40 people to show up about the future of money seems comically few, you know?
Right, right. But no,
Not that
it's
everybody
40
wants
is
to
the
show up to a
less.
meetup and everything.
40, I'd say 40 is the really least we have. It's usually between 60 to 100.
Yeah.
And I think so too. But I think it's a question of timing the market as well, right? When the price will go higher, it will be a different story as well, right? And
Sure.
it's also a question of how many people can we hold at a meetup, right? We cannot make 200, 300 people meetups every month, right? So we usually limit it at 100 people, and most of the time it gets sold out. It's just that some people don't show up, so we probably fall under the 100 range
Right.
often.
What's what's most exciting to you right now in the Bitcoin space? Like what's taking up a lot of your intellectual curiosity with regards to Bitcoin right now?
Honestly, so many things. Uh, I like a lot. The security is always one thing that really fascinates me. I'm looking a lot on Taproot right now, and music. That's something that I've really been working on lately. And Lightning is really interesting to me, and I like it to work on it more from a technical perspective. But when it comes to Lightning, I'm always asking myself whether it's more important to work on it now, since I believe demand might take longer to come. But I'd say Taproot is probably what I'm most excited about right now.
Right. And where do you go to satisfy that curiosity in terms of resources to learn, read, listen?
Sure. Well, I'm mostly a reader, to be honest. I listen to some podcasts for sure, but I'm uh, I'm always on Twitter as well, so that's
Sure.
how I get a lot of things. But definitely a lot from I love the Bitcoin Optech newsletter. That's one of the best resources that I think exists. Else, I always like to go on GitHub and look at different projects and try out different tools. So that's one thing as well. Um, and well, to be honest, I just have my own bank of resources that I go to very often. But Twitter is definitely the way to find the content, right?
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back to something you mentioned right at the opener, and you said that you used to be involved in mining, and then the Quebec hydro kind of fucked that all up. What exactly happened with like power and Bitcoin mining and stuff in Quebec?
Sure. So it's a saga of complicated events, to be honest. So if I'll try to resume it in the most concise way I can. So it started. My journey started in 2017, like in my garage and friend's garage. It was very small scale, and then we wanted to rent a place and scale the operation. So. And we went to a conference in January 2018 called from an organization called Capri Media, and Hydro Quebec was presenting at that conference, and they were presenting about blockchain opportunities and cryptocurrency opportunities, and they were telling entrepreneurs of the world, come to Quebec. We have a lot of energy. We can definitely set up your projects. So in the months from January, February, March, a lot of people, everybody was talking about Bitcoin mining in Quebec. I was taking a Uber. His cousin was making a Bitcoin mining operation. So it's really at the top of the bull market, right? So around, I think it was around March, April that Hydro Quebec announced a moratorium on on new operations. Essentially, they're just blocking all new operations and are analyzing the industry because the reason was that they had 18,000 megawatts of demand for new projects, and that
Wow.
obviously that they could never fill that need.
Right.
And my take on it right away was 18,000 megawatts. That's five times, six times higher of what Bitcoin is right now. Back then, and right now it's still not that far. So obviously they had done no due diligence when it comes to uh, distinguishing real demand versus fake demand. 18,000 megawatts was clearly not a real number, and now they've admitted that it was more likely closer to 1,000, probably even less. So they've admitted that now. And for a while, they were having public um, public moments where they were talking about, hey, we're gonna listen to the entrepreneurs, take questions, analyzing the situation, and it seemed, to be honest, it seemed kind of political as well.
Mhm.
There had been some news that the prime minister was involved in talks with Hydro Quebec about halting the industry. So now they have like a proposed framework where they are very like they demand a lot of information from these operations. They demand a lot of business information. You have to sign a contract for many years. You have to be ready to pay higher rates. You have to compete against other miners. And I'm not exactly sure how the technicalities of how it works. I just know that as an industry, it's much harder to get access of electricity than other industries, right? And at the same time, this was all happening. Amazon was closing a deal with Hydro Quebec for a couple tens of megawatts, right? And they always said the argument was also it didn't create jobs, but Amazon's data centers don't create jobs either, right? So it obviously didn't much make sense, and a lot of people, myself included, got kind of hurt because of this. We had rented. We didn't get that hurt. I'd say a lot of people got much more hurt than we did. In my case, we rented a 3,000 square feet warehouse, and we installed some miners. We probably filled like one third of the room with like half a megawatt, but then we wanted to scale up and we couldn't because the whole industry was halted. But
Mhm.
I've met some people who have bought warehouses for millions of dollars, and they couldn't use it. They couldn't use 1 inch of the warehouse for one miner because Hydro Quebec had to investigate this complicated issue.
Right. So what's the status now? Because they're still obviously allowing it, right? Blockstream's got the big mining operation in Quebec, isn't it?
Yes, but Blockstream closed the deal before everything this happened.
Ah.
Yeah, they were smart about it.
But
Well, the status now is that some people are able. right now to open mines, but a lot of the but it's still a very complicated process. You have to go. You have to compete against other miners because there's a limit that the industry can have for, I believe it's 300 megawatts. I'm not sure. And it's still very and it's still they kind of discriminate against these companies. They just don't like it. It seems maybe from a political point of view. I don't know. And also the interest has been lost. So a lot of people. Quebec could have become like could have been at the forefront of Bitcoin mining in the world, but a lot of companies now have located themselves in the United States, in other parts of Canada, just because they don't want to work with a partner that's kind of unstable, that one day has a position, then it switches. They prefer to work with either private entities who want to make the deals, or with other governments that are more open to innovation. And the
Right.
sad part of it, it's who's winning at the end. Not even Hydro Quebec is winning, because Hydro Quebec currently loses around $1 billion worth of electricity each year. Sure, they have profits, but what I mean is that uh, if you have hydroelectricity and you don't use it, well, it's lost. You cannot store it. So there's around 1 billion worth that gets lost every year. That's right there, and so hydro's losing, miners are losing, and maybe the folks, the regular folks, think it's good that we stop the Chinese miners from coming to Quebec, right? Because that's kind of the stereotype that was built. But at the end of the day, it's their money because it's a public entity, and it would have been better for everybody.
And that's extra bullshit because as a Newfoundlander, this one strikes home in particular because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the situation, but the Churchill Falls Dam that was built in Labrador in the 40s, I think, or maybe, yeah, 30s or 40s. I think the 40s, yeah. Um, they signed a 100-year deal with Quebec to provide like dirt cheap power. So Newfoundland is still paying out they're building another hydro dam now to try to get, cheaper hydropower, but it's, way over budget and it's a bit of a disaster. And they don't get that the hydro dam that they basically sold to Quebec back until 2040. They signed a 100-year lease or deal on it. So Quebec's getting all that fucking cheap energy, and obviously they're not managing it as optimally as they could. Fuckers.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I heard about the new 100 Newfoundland 100-year deal,
Yeah.
and actually, they sell a lot of that energy to Americans as well, and they say this they sell it even cheaper than they sell it here, uh, and a lot of companies, of mining companies, have established themselves in Quebec, so basically the electricity of Quebec finishes up being consumed by some Bitcoin miners, but it just finishes up being consumed in another country and sold at a loss. So
Yeah. It's all bullshit, but it does speak to a huge vulnerability in the Bitcoin ecosystem, which is state, uh, state-controlled power generators. What's your take on how that's been evolving and what the future might look like?
I totally agree with you on that. I think that's kind of my take on mining is that not only with this limit, but the scale limit, mining naturally becomes extremely centralized, and there will be technologies improving that, like better hash or Stratum version 2, which give more power to the individual miners and less to the pools, and that's interesting. But still, that doesn't change the economies of scales that the miners have to face. So I think there will be a lot of pressure from governments and a distribution of miners around the world. Not all of them concentrated in China, but some in China, some in the United States, some in Europe, will kind of give these countries like an interest to having their miners at the best as the best miners on the Bitcoin network. So they won't want to necessarily block the innovation from the miners, because if they block the innovation from the miners from the country, well, they're advantaging other countries in a way. So I think that sentiment will develop, kind of a nationalistic sentiment. But I also think miners at some point will have their own private dams to be able to provide electricity to themselves.
That'll be so badass when that,
Yeah.
if and when that happens. Because, I agree with what you're saying, but obviously one of the, very common concerns is that should a state actor, particularly one that has a lot of mining operations in their country, like China or Canada or the US or whatever, um, they could just nationalize all the operations. And, that's bad enough in itself. But if they colluded with some other big mining countries, then they could even disrupt the network, right?
Right, and then at the end of the day, that's why it's so important to run nodes, right? Because if nobody run a node, then the Bitcoin network would have already been destroyed by minor collusion. But I think that could happen. To be honest, I think we'll see that as a proposition of some left wing parties more and more to nationalize the mining industries. There's one of Quebec parties. Uh, which is the furthest to the left, who wishes to nationalize Bitcoin mining. But at the end of the day, they wish to nationalize every industry that consumes a lot of electricity. So it's not
Right.
just.
Well, that's a good point actually. But how do you feel about, can Trudeau and Canada seems to be very concerned and focused on climate change and the environment and that kind of stuff. Uh, I'm sure this comes up to people that you speak with and stuff like that. What's your rebuttal to people that, you know, basically Bitcoin's boiling the oceans because it uses so much energy? What's usually your comeback when they say that?
So the first thing I tell them is I ask them is what is Bitcoin solution? What is the Bitcoin solving? So one of the things Bitcoin is solving is this fiat money system that we have, where money is created from thin air. So obviously, when you compare money being created from thin air and money being created from real value, electricity, obviously the real value money, it's creating more, it's consuming more resources. And I tell them that's the whole point. If Bitcoin wasn't consuming resources, then it's being printed out of thin air, and then it's not reflecting the values that we want from it. So I tell them that first. I tell them that, but then Bitcoin mining consumes, and there's been reports about this, consumes most of its energy from renewable sources like hydroelectricity, and that's very evident in my opinion. Uh, I think there's a coin shares that shared a report on that situation. So that's something that I point to people out, and they're pretty convinced by that argument of hydroelectricity being the kind of what aliments the Bitcoin network.
Yeah, I think and I hope that there's more education about this topic, not just like the renewables, not just, making the payoff for, sustainable renewable electricity quicker and faster because of, the way Bitcoin mining can monetize, you know, locked energy and that kind of stuff. But obviously, I think the way the world is going with, the climate change debate, whatever side of it you're on, you're still going to have to confront that people are going to see Bitcoin as being horribly destructive in that capacity. And I think education around, how it could actually accelerate renewable energy is definitely great, but education around the true cost of a fiat money system is going to be really important as well, so that people know the intricacies and complexities of how that monetary system actually creates more waste than something like Bitcoin.
Right, and it's also the faces of a fiat money system that are have to be pointed in that type of question, because it's fun in games while the fiat money system is printing money and everybody's rich and everybody has a TV and a credit card full of debt. But once things go wrong and the system falls, then it's all chaos, and now it's much worse, right? So there's all these phases that have to be considered when analyzing a fiat money system, which is very different from a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard that is much more natural and has less up and downs.
Yeah. For sure. Gustavo, I'm going to hit you with the rapid fire questions now, unless there's some other topic you wanted to discuss beforehand.
Uh, I'm good with going straight to that. I'm if that's what you want, sure.
Perfect. All right. So basically, the first part is just a bunch of questions. You can answer them however long or as short as you like. And then the
Okay.
last part is just a word association where I say a word and you tell me the first thing that pops into your head.
Okay, let's
All
do
right.
that.
So we'll start off with the main one. What is money?
So I'll go pretty basic on this.
Sure.
Money, it's has three properties. In my opinion, the first one is store of value. Then it becomes a medium of exchange, and then becomes a unit of account. And to me, money, it's very distinct from a currency. Money is a currency can be considered kind of a fiat currency that's more used in that kinds of scenarios, more limited to the medium of exchange scenario. Money is more of a long-term system where economic systems gets built on top. So more the monetary system than the currency itself.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to a 10-year-old, what would you say?
There's physical property and there's digital property. When you have your phone, you have it in your hand. When you have a picture on your phone, you can click on copy 1,000 times. What if you could have a physical object, but on the digital world? And that's how Bitcoin is to me.
How will you know if Bitcoin has failed?
Um, that's a very good question. I think I would know if Bitcoin has failed if it passes too many halvings without having price action. I think if if it unpegs for, let's say, one halving, it's not too bad. But if it's been 12 years and there's been no price action on Bitcoin, I think we can declare it as a failure because there's no much minor traction that's happening because the reward is so low that there's no much incentive to go mine it. Uh, so that's why I think it's really important to capture the value now because we have all this supply that's being created, and later it won't be easy to capture.
Right. What does Bitcoin success look like to you?
Bitcoin success looks like to me when basically every central bank in the world will be holding Bitcoin, and basically that's probably the main one. But I think a lot of most financial networks will be based on Bitcoin, not by people necessarily being aware of it, the end users being aware of it, by the institutions developing on top of the network.
You have one resource, so a book, an article, a podcast episode, so not a podcast generally, but a specific episode with a specific guest or website to refer a newbie or someone who wants to learn more about Bitcoin to. Which is it for you?
uh, Verify.io. No, uh, I'm kidding. Uh, to be honest, I think I'd say the Stefan Rivera podcast. I think it's a podcast is really the form to educate someone. I believe who's a newbie. It's the most understandable medium and the easiest one. And I think Stefan really does the steps to go from a newbie to an expert in an interesting way.
For sure, but I'm asking for an episode, like
Ah,
specifically.
precisely an episode.
Yeah.
I like this episode that Max Hillerbrand did with Stefan Libera. I think it was like an introduction
Hardware wallets.
to hardware wallets. Yes, I think you really well explained the key management
Nice.
in that one.
What other investments are you interested in, if any?
Uh, if any. um, Mostly stocks in my own company and stocks in other private companies. I think value comes from exclusive deals when it comes to stocks most of the time, or it comes from hard assets like Bitcoin, gold, and real estate.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone just entering the space right now?
Don't touch any shit coins.
what
Very
mo-
simple.
what movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
I was thinking about this earlier this week. I'd say Metropolis 2001. I don't know if you know that movie.
No.
It's like a Japanese animated movie where it's kind of like a totalitarian government that's taking place, and they're trying to develop this like ultimate AI. And there's all this city being developed underground. It's really cypherpunk. And at the end, it kind of fails the AI that they were developing, and it kind of shows how we have this fiat currency system that I compare it to this AI. It's kind of machine that the state is trying to create, but ultimately it always ends up failing.
Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
This is a hard question. So I think I think Bitcoin can be stopped, and this might be an unpopular opinion. I think it's possible for some countries to declare war on Bitcoin, and I think it could be stopped in that sense. From a very political point of view, I think that could happen at a point where basically Bitcoin would be much higher in price than now, and some politicians would say, "Hey, all these Bitcoiners, they don't want to pay their taxes. They don't want to share with the system." So I think that there could be something like an executive order 6102 on Bitcoin, which was when Franklin Roosevelt confiscated the gold. And I think most Bitcoiners kind of are too optimistic about this. I'd say it's not obviously a loss, but since the governments have the military control, I think a battle could unravel.
What's something about Bitcoin you don't understand very well or you'd like to spend more time learning about?
Uh, uh, to be honest, I don't really understand all these like financial models. I'm not really the financial guy, so that's probably something that I have to look more into it. Financial models concerning bitcoins, metrics, financial metrics, and things like that.
What have you learned about yourself or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
Uh, I've been becoming much more interested in the political objectives of freedom and separation of money and state. That's definitely something that I've thought I've learned about myself. Also, that my ultimate purpose is to be an entrepreneur, and I believe profoundly in that and the capabilities of human beings to develop themselves through to private property and business means. So I'd say that's probably the most important one.
What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If nothing on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
Uh, it's hard because a lot of my contrarian opinions on other subjects are kind of
Our
shared.
Bitcoin.
No, are kind of
Oh,
shared by the Bitcoin community.
right,
So
right.
they're not. I'm not a contrarian on that when it comes to the Bitcoin community. So I'd say I think one of my most contrarian views is Bitcoin Lightning can very much fail or become obsolete in the future years. I still consider it as the one with the most chances of succeeding as a scaling technology, but I just fear that we pass too many years that uh, there's not much demand developing because people want to store value, and then something new comes along and becomes obsolete, or else it never gets really used.
Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
Uh, those are the questions that I don't like to answer too much. I'd say, without being too optimistic, I'd say 200,000 US dollars.
What if we're wrong? What if, we're all wrong about this Bitcoin thing?
What if we're wrong about this Bitcoin thing? I've thought of this a lot, and like, what do you mean? What would I do?
Yeah, what would you do? Yeah.
Honestly, I'd probably take, like, let's say if Bitcoin fail scenario happens, and many years come by and it just never pulls. Uh, I'd probably still buy Bitcoin just like as a collection thing. Then I can tell my kids. But I'd probably take some time to think and really develop more my coding skills, because if Bitcoin fails, I'm pretty sure software will never fail. So I always think of hedging myself that way.
In the future, when Bitcoin hits, let's say $1 million, whenever that is, what are you going to spend your satoshis on that will benefit you or society?
Uh, to be honest, I haven't really thought of this. I think to myself, I really like to buy a land. This is to be close with nature. This is one of my higher purposes. So I think I do that for myself. For society, I think I really want to encourage other entrepreneurial efforts that folks will have. So probably some not-for-profit causes related to increasing entrepreneurial opportunities for everyone.
What's one question you'd like to see added to this list?
One question to see added to this list uh, is Tron the natural friend of Bitcoin? No, I don't know. Um, Maybe I don't know. What's whether someone sees himself working in the Bitcoin industry forever or not. I think a lot of people separate business from Bitcoin. A lot of people have different jobs, and that's fine. And I think a lot of people will also want to switch at a certain point to a different industry while keeping the interest and the hobby.
Right. Okay, this is the last part. This is the word association. So I'll just say a word. You tell me what comes to your head.
Okay, do I tell you a word or a sentence?
Yeah, one word is best, but whatever pops into your head.
Okay,
Democracy,
Bitcoin.
the Lightning Network,
Failure.
government,
Bitcoin.
human
uh,
rights.
Capitalism.
Don't say Bitcoin. Violence,
Guns.
ego.
Craig Wright.
Say again.
Craig Wright.
Right, right. Greed,
Excuse me.
greed,
Warren Buffett.
wealth,
Gold.
privacy,
Wasabi.
hate speech,
Bullshit.
gold,
Excuse me.
gold,
Silver.
guns,
Violence.
revolution,
Bitcoin.
socialism,
Bullshit.
family,
The most important.
inequality,
An excuse to push political systems.
hell,
Fiat.
liberty.
1776.
Say again.
The year of the American Revolution.
Uh, energy
Hydroelectricity.
and Bitcoin.
Mining.
Awesome, Gustavo. That's all I got for you, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. Enjoy chatting with you. Is there anywhere or anyone you wanted to shout out, or destinations or anything like that?
Sure, certainly. So thanks a lot to you, John, for inviting me. It was a real pleasure. I had a great time. So I actually like to shout out Thibaut Maréchal. I think he was the one who talked to you about me. Thibaut is
He
one of
mentioned you, yeah.
he's one of my dearest friends in the Bitcoin community. I think they're making good efforts in Knox, and we probably will have some things verify in Knox in the future. So
Nice.
for everybody who wants to follow us, it's Verify BTC on Twitter and Verify.io. We have a pretty cool blog where we share a lot of technical content. So that's also how we show our expertise. And I recommend it to everybody. There's a lot of cool stuff to read on the blog. Else, stay tuned because we will have a product that will be announced soon. So there will be an announcement in the following month or so.
Interesting, interesting. And I'll corroborate the blog you guys do is great. I was checking it out in preparation for this. Lots of good articles, not too long, on a wide range of subjects. Um, the only thing I'll say though is the illustrations on the blog. You got to make them like clickable and expandable, because some of them have so much text in them. You know, they're hard to read if you're just, you know, if you don't blow them up. So
Right,
if you,
right. That's good. That's a good feedback. Thanks for that. We recently changed web stack, so we forgot to make that. But
yeah.
thank you for that
But
feedback.
man, thanks again for coming on. I'm sure we'll meet sometime in Meet Space, either in Montreal or somewhere else. So until
Sure.
that time, all the best. Keep up the good work, and yeah, we'll speak to you in the future.
All right. Thanks. Thanks a lot, John. Well, I'll be in San Francisco in March if you're ever
Nice.
there for the conference.
I'm not going to make it this year,
Ah,
but
all right.
enjoy yourself. I'm sure it's
All
going to be
right.
great.
Thank you. All right. Well, take care. Thanks a
Take care,
lot.
brother. Bye bye.
Bye.